I thought we were alone, until a man blinked in the corner of the basement, one quiet blink just enough to tell me that whatever sound I'd heard a moment before wasn't the house settling. It was a person deciding whether we belonged there or not. These are 4 true trips that went horribly wrong. I've flown for work, booked cute little houses thinking how romantic, driven through the middle of the night because surprises are worth it. And I've sat on a beach at dusk, holding someone's hand while strangers watched like vultures. I tell these stories because they're mine. Messy, small, dumb in places and terrifying in others. They're also a reminder. Travel doesn't make you immune to danger. If anything, it strips away some of your safety nets and shows how fast vacation can turn into get out now. Quick note. If you like hearing true travel horror told by someone who's learned the expensive way, hit subscribe. I'll tell you the rest. We got away from the basement, but that was only the beginning. The rental was exactly what the listing promised. Secluded, charming, off the beaten path with a big porch and a view of nothing but trees. It was a work trip that turned into a 2-day escape. I convinced my wife to come along for the second night, partly because she'd been home doing laundry while I lived out of a suitcase, and mostly because the place looked like the kind of retreat where people drink red wine and forget to check their email. First night felt like a movie. Wood stove, creaking floors, distant owls. It was peaceful in that rural way where the quiet starts to feel like a presence. We unpacked, ate takeout by the fireplace, and fell asleep early. Around 2 in the morning, my wife woke me up whispering, "Did you hear that?" She said she'd felt watched. I'm the kind of person who argues with midnight paranoia, so I mumbled, "Probably a raccoon," and turned over. She kept saying she was cold, though. Not the weather cold, but the sort of nervous chill that crawls under your skin. When we woke up, a pair of her socks were missing from the laundry basket, and a shirt she'd laid out for the morning was half folded in a way she swore she hadn't done. Tiny things, the kind you can blame on sleepwalking or being absent-minded, but each tiny thing stacked like weight on a scale. That afternoon, I found a shoe on the back porch, not ours. A cheap sneaker, mud-caked, the sort you would wear if you were hiding out in the woods, not the sort you'd expect to be left on a porch where vacationing couples sip coffee. I told myself the neighbor must have dropped it. The nearest house was about a quarter mile through the trees. But something in me didn't let the thought settle. I checked the locks, checked the windows, and joked with my wife that she should sleep with one eye open. She didn't laugh. Night came and the noises began. Not the normal house settling or tree branches. Tiny creaks, like someone shifting their weight. A soft rustle outside the kitchen window. Once, a click, the kind a camera makes when you press the shutter. My brain kept offering mundane explanations. Wildlife, a raccoon, the house breathing. My wife's breathing sharpened into a rhythm that matched the building tension in the house. We went to bed, but neither of us slept well. The bed felt small and thin as paper under those sounds. At one point I heard footsteps downstairs. I told myself to be calm. I got up, wrapped a bathrobe around me, and went for a flashlight. The house looked different in a beam of light. Every drawer and box I passed flickered into possible hiding places. I called out, "Hello? Hello?" And the house answered with its old timbers. No response. I moved toward the basement door, because the basement is always where the "someone is in the house" stories go in real life. The door was warmer than it should have been, like somebody had been down there recently. My heart was in my throat. I told myself to breathe, to think, to be ridiculous. I told myself I was being a coward. The basement steps smelled like damp cardboard and spilled oil. Boxes, old furniture, storage mostly. The beam of my flashlight swept the room and landed on a figure at the far edge, a man in a red hat standing very still. For a second I didn't process that it was a man. I processed the red hat like one of those cartoon signs, danger, red flag, stop. Then the hat moved slightly, and a single blink, deliberate and human. Everything narrowed. My mind tried to catalogue options, call out, run, tackle. I remember feeling the absurd clarity of thinking, this is a place I promised to be brave in. This is the moment you don't want to be the guy who underestimates strangers. The man did not move toward me. He looked at me, blinked again, and then turned and walked deeper into the shadow of a shelving unit. There was something almost patient about him, not frantic, but methodical, like he'd been waiting to see which of us would notice first. I didn't stay to test his patience. I went upstairs, grabbed my wife and whispered, "We have to go. Now." My voice sounded strange in the dark house, the way a whisper sometimes sounds like a shout. We grabbed phones, keys, and the few things we could think to take. I called the rental manager, who claimed to be on his way, but the way he said it was slow and vague. "I'll be there soon," without urgency. The manager's voice made my stomach flop. I could hear our neighbors in the distance, a dog barking, nothing that suggested immediate help. We left with the headlights cutting through the trees and the thunder of our own footsteps. Behind us, the house held its breath. We drove to a lit gas station 10 minutes away and sat in the car like two people who had been in a train accident and were waiting to see what moved first. The manager showed up later, apologetic and embarrassed, and said he'd checked the security footage. We were told the footage showed someone inside the house, a shadow moving through the rooms, and then walking down those same basement steps. That was the last thing we were ever shown. We demanded the police. They came. They wrote down what we said and asked a handful of the normal questions. Did anyone else witness anything? Did we lose anything? They advised us to stay somewhere safer. We did what we were told. We booked a hotel and slept under fluorescent lights for the rest of the trip. The rest of the aftermath was a bitter mix of adrenaline come-down and bureaucratic blur. The rental manager insisted on giving us his word and said he'd take care of it, which is the kind of sentence that never comforts anyone. There were follow-up emails that promised investigation, and then there was silence. I can't tell you if the man in the red hat was ever caught. I don't know if he lived in one of the neighboring houses or was someone who'd been watching rental listings online. All I know is how we felt afterward. Small, naked in a new way, and suddenly very aware that the places you pick to be alone with someone can hide other people's idea of alone and belonging. I learned two things that week. One, the small, weird things matter. Missing socks, a shoe on the porch, a camera click, they add up. Two, I stopped renting isolated houses for work. I told myself it was a practical decision, but the truth was worse. A part of me found I liked the blunt honesty of a hotel, someone to call, a lobby with people, lights that didn't go out when you turned them off. The illusion of privacy is seductive until the wrong person sees it as permission. We got away, but we didn't shake it off easily. Months later, I'd catch myself checking beneath the porch when we visited a friend's house, or walking faster past dim doorways. That man in the red hat lodged himself inside my head like a splinter. You think a luxury resort is a different beast. Think again. I was in Costa Rica with Julie, and it felt like a postcard. It was one of those resorts where everything seemed designed to convince you that the world was ordered and safe. Manicured gardens, staff with impeccable smiles, umbrellas at the ready. The place smelled like citrus and sunscreen, and there was a constant low soundtrack of waves that filled the quiet between people's conversations. Julie and I had been together a while, and that trip was supposed to be a soft thing. 2 days to let the noise of normal life quiet down. We ate ceviche at sunset. We took pictures by the pool. We made plans to go snorkeling the next morning. But even in glass and bamboo paradise, the small, unreadable things started. A lounge chair was slightly angled the wrong way when we sat down. Someone walked away a little too quickly from a path we'd crossed. Once, while we were changing in the outdoor shower, we heard movement in the bushes. I told myself it was coyotes, those raccoon-like animals that are tourist lore there, and Julie laughed, but her laugh had an edge. Later, at dinner, a man walked by, pretending to be a maintenance worker. He had a little camera bag slung over his shoulder and an extra saunter in his step. Julie pointed him out a half-hour later when we saw his silhouette hurry behind a clump of hedges the moment we turned our heads. His hands were full of leaves and a tucked-in device that looked like a camera lens. The weirdest moment came one night when we were back in our room, lights low. The screened patio door cracked open to let in warm air. I was half asleep on the couch when something small caught my eye. A movement in the dark beyond the mesh of the screen. I sat up. There was a silhouette just beyond our patio, a shape that held itself like someone peeking, the top of a head and shoulders arrested at the doorway to our life. I remember the exact color of the pool light reflecting off a palm frond. I remember the sound of Julie's breath, slow and unaware. I remember thinking for an instant that I could walk out and confront whoever it was. That thought lasted a second and then left me astonished at its recklessness. Instead, I leaned forward and clicked the lamp on. The silhouette darted away. We called the front desk. They took the report seriously, in the way big resorts sometimes do, a flurry of professionalism that feels both comforting and indistinct. They told us to lock the doors and stay put while security reviewed surveillance. A manager came up an hour later looking contrite, arms full of apologies, and said they'd found footage of a man attempting to peek into our patio. He said the man had been circling other rooms too. There was a line in his voice, "This is very unusual," that sounded like meaning, "This is exactly what you fear," without the manager wanting to say it. They offered to move us to another villa. We took it, because what else do you do when someone has been watching you and the person offering comfort is the same company who owns the place? They moved us. We packed everything in a rush, because despite the soft-spoken professionalism, the idea of someone crouched behind a palm frond with a camera was a taste no one wants in their mouth. We left early the next morning. There were emails later from the resort, a few messages promising follow-up and stating they'd reviewed policies and would take steps. The truth remained. We didn't know who the man was, where he came from, or whether he'd tricked his way into staff areas. The footage existed, they said, but I never saw it. The manager promised action, which translated into moving us across the property and a voucher for a dinner we didn't want. That trip left a different kind of bruise. The Red Hat incident had been invasion of our space in a house. The Costa Rica thing was invasion with a lens. Somebody's habit of looking and recording without consent. That's a small, modern violation, but it leaves you feeling exposed in a way that doesn't make sense. You can't blame the resort entirely. It's a large facility with thousands of interactions. But I resented the way people's faces can fit into a staff uniform and become invisible until something goes wrong. I resented the way promises to take care of it are often the quiet end of an event meant to be kept off record. We left. The island air was the same, wild and indifferent. I have a photo from that trip, Julie laughing at a stray dog, the ocean blurred behind her, and sometimes when I look at it, my chest tightens. I don't know if the man with the camera was from the staff or someone who'd been pretending to be. The resort said they were investigating. For all I know, they found nothing. What stayed with me was the sense that a place designed to protect guests could also provide a screen behind which someone could watch. The genre of the crime had changed, from the hulking invader in a red hat to the quiet watcher with a camera. Same violation, different hand. You assume the world tips toward safety because a place has staff and security, but the line between help and harm is thin, oddly human, and it depends on intentions you can't always see. We got away from the resort early and went home with brittle laughs and a couple of unanswered questions. We told friends and mostly heard relief in their voices, as if merely being back home was the cure. It wasn't. The image of that silhouette by the screened patio kept replaying. I started to notice small things again. A late-night car that lingered across the street, someone taking a photo in the background of a group shot. Paranoia is a luxury you can't afford, but it visits anyway. The night I decided I would never take that particular kind of risk again was later, on a long drive. It was the kind of trip I thought would prove I could still be spontaneous and brave. I had the engagement ring in my pocket, meant for a surprise my family would never see. I was heading across state lines to show up at my parents' house like a movie plot. It was foggy, the kind of fog that eats the edges of the road and turns taillights into pale moons. There were detours, and one of those words that feels like an official problem: road closed. I took the detour because time and overconfidence are a bad pair. I made the wrong turn when my phone decided it wanted to be an unreliable compass. I drove too long, or maybe not long enough, and the next thing I knew I was off the road, in a ditch, the car half submerged in wet night. The impact wasn't dramatic, a soft, muting thud, but it left me with a jolt and a broken headlight. My phone screen cracked when I slammed the glove compartment. The world went quiet except for the rain and my own breath. I pulled myself out, checked the engine like a man who knows nothing about engines, and realized I couldn't see the taillights of a passing car through the fog. I tried to call for a tow and heard nothing but dead space. No bars. No bars felt like a threat in a new key. Then a truck pulled over, headlights cutting through the fog. An older couple climbed out and offered help. They were the kind of people who say, "You look like you could use some coffee," and mean it. The woman smiled in a way that felt practiced, and the man promised he could pull my car out if I hooked him up. I remember thinking that all of this could be the exact moment when the story either became a modern Americana hero moment, thankful stranger saves stranded driver, or something far worse. They seemed helpful at first. The woman started opening the back of the truck and rummaging for a rope, while the man crouched to look at my bumper. He asked me a lot of questions. Where I was headed, who I was calling, whether I was alone. I answered because what else do you answer when someone is offering help and it's midnight and fog is swallowing the highway? The older woman kept glancing at my pockets like she could see inside them. She even asked casually, "Traveling alone?" in the same breath as offering a cigarette. I said yes, though I'd planned this surprise because none of this felt like the place for secrets. Then a younger guy appeared from somewhere behind the truck. He was shorter, abrupt, and he had a smell you notice on people who've been hanging around in the cold, cigarette smoke and something metallic. He was not introduced, and his arrival made the older couple's movements sharper, like a signal had been given. The younger man's hand brushed a pocket in a way that wasn't accidental. He had a small knife, the kind with a folding blade, and he let it show in the light the way someone does to remind you they have options. I don't want to dramatize beyond what happened. I'm not here to make villains into cartoon monsters. But in that dim, everything slowed. The generous faces became expectant. The woman said, almost conversationally, "We'll just help you move your stuff to the truck so you can come with us to get it fixed." Her voice held no threat on the surface. It had the soft quality of someone giving a suggestion. The young man, the one with the blade, leaned forward like he was checking a price tag. Something in me erupted and said, "This is not a suggestion." My gut tightened to a knot I couldn't undo. I saw what the plan was, or at least I understood enough to know whether I wanted to be part of it. I backed away. I didn't ask them to take me to a station or call someone. I turned and ran into the trees, into the dark where the fog muffled my steps and my breath sounded like another life. They called after me in that "oh, come back" tone that smiles in the dark. I hid behind tree trunks with the rain turning my shirt to cling to me, and I watched them work on the car. They ransacked the glove compartment and the trunk, pulling out the few items I'd brought. I couldn't see faces clearly, just hands and motion. When they realized there was no easy haul, they seemed annoyed and left, arguing quietly. I stayed put until I heard a vehicle drive away. After that, I walked through the woods, soaked and moving in fits, because staying still felt like an invitation. I found a road, little by little, and flagged down a trucker who gave me directions to the nearest gas station. My phone worked there. In the bright light and people, I called the police and told them what had happened. They came later and took a report. Their questions were the same as always, professional and careful, and their faces were patient in the way of people who've seen repeated versions of this script. They said it sounded like a robbery, and they asked me to describe the people. I did what I could, the older couple, the younger man with the blade. No names, no faces I could confirm beyond impressions. What changed after that night was not dramatic. There was no arrest, no cinematic chase. There was the slow clawing back of a sense of safety that takes a long time. I stopped driving late at night. I started texting someone when I left a parking lot. Some habits are small, practical and effective. Others are corrosive. I found myself checking the back seat reflexively when I got into my car, like a reflex left over from that fog. I tell you that part because I want you to feel how quickly a small inconvenience can become a life-altering thing. It wasn't the crash that terrified me as much as how ready the wrong people were to step in under the guise of help. There's a line between being kind and being opportunistic, and sometimes it's only intention that separates them. Afterward, friends told me I was lucky. I agreed. But luck has no moral center, it's random and cold. The rest was a long, awkward learning curve. You think you're alone on a foggy road until you aren't. There was one more trip left on the list, the one that still stabs me when I'm on a beach and the sun drops like an eyelid. We were in Key West, finishing a vacation that should have felt like everything it promised. Sand, salt, laughter. Ali and I had spent the day doing the tourist things, but that night I wanted something quiet. It was late, the kind of night where street lamps cast slender halos and tourists drift home in small clumps. We walked down to the beach. I had the ring in my pocket, and for a moment I let the fantasy play out in my head. The line, the knot. Not everything made it to reality. That's another truth travel teaches you. Timing is slippery. The beach was mostly empty. 2 couples were there, sitting a little distance away, their shapes lit occasionally by cigarette embers and the glow from someone's phone. They watched us for a while in a way that felt like observation more than curiosity. People watch, sure, but there was a fixedness to their attention that made my skin crawl. When they moved closer, we noticed the manner of their smiles. They weren't interested in small talk. It felt like something else, a curiosity about how we would react. Ali joked nervously and tugged her shirt tighter, the way people unconsciously do. I tried to keep things light. We talked about dumb things, like the worst souvenir we'd bought. But then a man stood up from one of the small groups and came over with a friendly smile that didn't touch his eyes. He introduced himself with a name I don't remember now, all the details like that blur when adrenaline steals them, and he asked if we wanted a drink. I said no, politely. He got closer anyway. Then another man moved in behind him. The 2 women from the couples sat down on the sand and laughed at something with a kind of performative mirth that made me uncomfortable. All of it escalated in a way that feels ridiculous when you try to explain it. A joke that turned into a shove that turned into an attempt to separate Ali and me. One of the men grabbed me from behind and tried to wrestle the ring out of my pocket. Another pushed Ali and the women laughed. It happened fast and blurred, the kind of violence that isn't cinematic but brutal in its efficiency. I remember smelling alcohol and salt and feeling a hot pain in my forearm. I remember tasting blood and thinking, not eloquently, that's not how this should go. We managed to break away, more by luck and the chaos of the moment than by any plan. We fled, barefoot on hot sand, leaving our towels and the idea of a romantic night behind. People on the beach watched. Some filmed with their phones, others called out things you don't want to hear. We shook and bled, and made it back to our hotel room, where Ali sat with the lights on and the door locked like a child, breathing in the steadier rhythm that comes when you finally feel safe enough to stop running. We didn't call the police that night. We left the next morning. There are reasons people make those choices: embarrassment, the foggy promise that telling the story will make you relive it, the dread of paperwork, and being asked to do it all over again. We later went to urgent care, got stitches, and someone told us we were brave. I suppose bravery is there, but it's threaded with a stubbornness that sometimes looks like denial. The aftermath is a hollow place, healing physical wounds, negotiating the memory, tracing the line of what was done and what was not. People told us to be careful. They told us what we could have done differently. It's easy to rewrite the past with advice like a sword. But the truth is, the reaction in the moment is a messy human thing. We told the hotel management later, and they said they would review footage. I don't know if anything came of it. I don't know if those couples were ever identified. Some things remain unresolved, and the not knowing is a live thing you carry. When I think back to these trips, one image keeps recurring: a blink in the dark, a silhouette at a screen, a hand on a pocket, laughter that's too loud. These are small gestures that become the language of threat. They taught me that danger often doesn't arrive wearing a mask. It arrives wearing a hat, a uniform, a practiced smile, and sometimes the face of someone who offers to help. I'm telling you all of this not to scare you into never leaving your front door, but because these nights taught me something practical and ugly. Normality is thin, and it can be punctured in a dozen almost invisible ways. The lesson isn't how to lock every door, it's that you pay attention to the small things. A shoe on the porch, a camera click, the person who lingers too long. Those details matter because they are the breadcrumbs that lead to the larger thing. And yet, even with all that, I still travel. I still want the quiet porch sometimes. I still book places and hope for palm trees and ocean air. The difference now is less about fear and more about the ledger of risk. I travel with more awareness and less naive faith in the world. The memory of these events stays in the margins of my plans like a cautionary note. It's the smell of wet wood for me, the metallic clink of a camera closing, the whisper of fog against a window. Those small things are how I remember to move differently. We left Key West in a hurry. We left the house with the basement light still on. We left the resort with a manager's apology in our inbox. We left the fog and a dented car behind, and walked away with no neat endings, only the steady, grinding lesson that sometimes the worst parts of travel are the parts where you are most exposed to other people's choices. I'll tell you the last story, the one with the night road and the woods, more fully next. There's something in that night I didn't say yet. A small moment I kept to myself because it felt too stupid and too shameful to admit. It's the part where the line between being grateful for help and recognizing danger blurred in a way I hadn't prepared for. But that comes next. There's one detail from that foggy night I haven't said, because it felt petty and stupid at the time, but it kept gnawing at me afterward. When the older woman first offered to help, I almost let my manners win. There's a pressure in those moments to be the decent person, the one who says thank you, and hands over a few things in trust because it feels worse to refuse someone's help than to risk a stranger. I almost did it. I almost handed over the keys to be towed somewhere, or showed them where I'd stashed the ring I'd been carrying for a surprise. Don't ask me why that small, performative politeness mattered. It's human to want to be polite even when you're scared. But in the middle of the woods at 2 a.m., I came face to face with how dangerous that reflex can be. I told myself I'd be fine because being polite buys you social lubricant. I told myself I wasn't the sort of person who'd let someone take advantage of me. The woman's practiced smile made me want to believe her. In the moment, the thought of embarrassing myself by refusing or causing more trouble almost outweighed my gut. That moment of near complacency is what haunts me more than the knife or the ransacked glove compartment. It's the memory of my own willingness, if only briefly, to trust a stranger because it was easier than causing a scene. I ran because a small piece of me snapped. I'd rather look foolish than become someone else's easy mark. That's a prissy little truth that sits with me. Sometimes the worst part is what you almost did. After I flagged down the trucker and made it to the station, the bright lights felt like medicine. People moving without hidden agendas. I called the police and tried to describe those faces, but the fog had smudged them into impressions. Older couple, younger man with a folding knife. The officers were kind in that weary official way. They asked if I wanted to go to the hospital. My hands were shaking, but I declined. The physical wounds were small, the mental ones were wide and ragged. They told me they'd drive by the scene and see what they could find. A patrol came later to my parents' house because someone had phoned in a report. That was the closest thing to closure, a neighborhood canvas that produced little but a scrap of timeline, and the professional nod that meant we logged it. No arrests came. The car was insured. The insurance took their time and asked a lot of questions I didn't have the heart for. It became one of those small administrative fights that follow big emotional things. Paperwork, deductible letters, the awkward follow-up calls that feel in their way, like reminders that the world goes on with its business, even when you don't. In the months after that night, I did practical things I could control. I replaced the locks on my apartment. I started texting my location to a friend when I left somewhere late. I stopped driving overnight unless I had someone with me. Those are sensible. But there were stranger, quieter changes too. I started to notice the way a smile can be used as currency. I noticed how often I measured people for threat. I noticed a funny, small physical tick. My shoulders always tense for a beat when someone approaches from behind. Habits like these are not heroic. They are defensive. You reorganize your life around that memory so you don't have to replay it again. And then the rental, the red hat. Those images kept looping too. The basement blink. Sometimes when it's late and I'm alone, I'll hear a creak in an old floorboard, and my mind will run through the checklist. Was anyone in the house? Did we lock the back door? When we finally forced ourselves to return to normal renting because the world insists you don't live in hotels forever, we started choosing differently. No more remote properties with secluded in the listing. If a place said cozy and private, it got an automatic fail. Hotels felt blunt and honest. You pay for brightness and people in lobbies, and I find now there's comfort in that kind of mundanity. I still catch myself scanning porches when I walk up to a friend's house, a ridiculous half-second of suspicion that feels like a reflex reaction to being watched. The rental manager's apology and claims of investigation become a pattern. Someone offers a kind word and a promise, and then the promise fades into email silence. I never saw the man in the red hat caught on footage beyond the single shadow in the grainy clip the manager showed, and no one gave us more than sympathetic words. The lack of resolution was almost worse than the night itself. Costa Rica left a different scar. It's odd how two similar invasions, someone in your private space, can leave such varied marks. The red hat was physical, immediate. The camera was a quiet violation, a modern theft of privacy. After we left that resort, Julie and I found ourselves sitting side by side at home and pausing when someone took out a phone. We argued, the stupid way people do about details. Did we overreact? Should we have stayed and insisted to see the footage? In the end, we both knew the answer. It wasn't our obligation to prove anything to the resort. But it still undercut something. You expect a place built to shelter you will notice the difference when a stranger is watching. When a business becomes room, staff, rules, and then bureaucracy, it feels less like a community and more like a system that will tidy the mess and move along. A small thing I didn't say before. When the manager offered us a new villa and a voucher, I remember Julie folding the paper towel they gave her into a neat square, a very small domestic motion that felt like the last human thing in a corporate exchange. She said quietly, "I don't want to feel like I owe them my silence." We didn't keep the voucher. We accepted the move, because fear has a way of making the practical decision seem obvious, even if it doesn't ease the chest tightening. Months later, when friends asked about Costa Rica, I found myself chewing sentences like they were hard bread. "It was beautiful," I'd say, and then stop. You learn to put qualifiers in your voice because people don't always want to sit in discomfort with you. They'd nod and say how lucky you were to have had time in such a place, and you'd smile because it's easier than explaining that a beach can hold a monstrous indifference. The Key West night was, in some ways, the most intimate violation. There's an ugliness to violence that's small and messy. No grand gestures, just hands and laughter, and the sudden bruising inversion of safety you thought you had on a warm, easy shore. After the assault, we did the things you might expect, and also the things you don't. We went to urgent care for stitches. We cleaned what needed cleaning and bandaged wounds that, in the larger view, would heal. But what didn't heal easily was trust. Ali slept with the light on for weeks. She'd flinch at the sound of someone starting a laugh from another room. I suppose I imagined we'd be angry and clear and force the world to line up behind us. Instead, we were tired and ashamed and small, in ways that took longer to articulate. We left early because staying felt like continuing the conversation with people who had tried to turn our night into a spectacle. Leaving was a blunt, practical decision, and it felt like an admission of defeat. But sometimes, escape is the better moral move. Get out of the ring. Don't give them a second act to witness. People gave us advice. Some of it was helpful in a practical kind of way. Some of it was worse, the kind that hints at fault-finding, the "why were you there in the first place" tone. Those comments are their own kind of violence because they make you justify your existence in public places. Ali and I talked about reporting, about pressing charges. We didn't, not right away. The reasons for that are complicated: embarrassment, fear of rehashing, the slippery hope that time will soften the cut. Eventually, we did report to the hotel. The manager listened. That was the pattern again. Words, a promise of footage review, a procedural nod, and then the long silence. It's possible something happened behind the scenes. It's also possible it didn't. We had no clear feedback. It became one of those private reckonings you carry. You can demand justice, but often the system asks you for proof that you were harmed in the right way before it will move. Those unresolved threads have consequences. They live in behavior. Ali stopped walking on the beach at night. I stopped bringing up the ring in conversation the way I once imagined I would. Instead of planning a montage of romantic gestures, I learned to make safer, smaller moments: breakfast at daylight, a walk where there are other people. If that sounds like fear winning, maybe it is. But it's also a strategy for continuing to live in the world without handing every corner of it to anxiety. All 4 of those nights pushed me into a strange education about how people present themselves. The honest ones are obvious. The repair guy with grease-stained hands, the neighbor whose dog barks at everything. The dishonest ones are the danger because they've practiced smoothing their edges. They come with uniforms, with practiced smiles, with offers to help. They know which buttons to press. That's the chilling bit. Threat often arrives without the mask you expect. It can be a red hat, a camera bag, an "I'll pull you out of the ditch" line, or a group that moves like predators and laughs to cover the weight of what they're doing. I don't want to leave you with just fear. There's also this: I learned to keep my radar on without letting it flatten me. That's a tricky balance. The world didn't become dark because of those nights. It became layered. I still travel because the cost of never leaving the house felt bigger than the cost of being cautious. I tell you this because I want the stories to have teeth, less as instruction manuals and more as memory warnings. Those small things mattered. A missing sock in a laundry basket, A camera click in a bamboo hedge, the way fog eats a taillight. They pile up and give you the shape of a risk you might not have noticed otherwise. There were practical, small rituals I adopted, not as gospel, but as personal habits. I started to check hotel lobbies for cameras in places that made me uneasy. I learned to put my phone on the dashboard when I parked on a lonely road so I could be visible through the windshield. I stopped assuming competence in uniforms without verifying. I would rather arrive at a hotel at midnight and look like an inconvenienced tourist than a couple convinced that a creaky house was peaceful. These are not revelations. They are tiny adjustments people make after being exposed. They are the scaffolding you build around your life so you can keep doing the things you love. Therapy helped too. Talking it through with someone who could hold the details without flinching made the memory less claustrophobic. It didn't erase the images. No talk will do that. But it gave me language to separate the immediate terror from the cautious person I wanted to be. Part of healing was acknowledging the weird little shame I felt for being caught out by my own politeness or my own desire to surprise someone. Admitting that doesn't make you weak. It makes you someone who recognizes where they erred and chooses differently. I should say something about blame. It's tempting to react angrily at the world, to want to label places and people as monsters. That's not useful. Some of the people who hurt us are opportunists. Others might be kids with poor decisions. Some might be criminals. I don't know their stories, and it's not my job to imagine them. What is my job is to hold the fact that these things happened and to learn from them. I refuse to turn my stories into a map of fear I hand to other people as unquestionable doctrine. Instead, I offer them as a ledger of what I noticed and what I changed. If one person watching this says, "I'll check the other side of the house before we unpack," then these stories did some work. If someone says, "I'll bring a charger and a phone battery when I drive late," that's useful. These aren't universal laws. They're small, personal decisions informed by scare and sense. Some nights I think about the people who watched. Did the man in the red hat ever see another house? Another couple? Did the man with the camera ever get bored and move on? Did the older couple find another car to ransack? I don't know. Those questions are heavy and unanswerable, and they leave you with the same dull ache of an open file. The lack of a neat ending is, I think, the cruelest part. We live with the unknown because often there is no tidy narrative where the bad guy is brought to justice and everything is restored. Real life tends to end with an uneasy peace, a settling that's not forgiveness, but a new way to move forward. So where does that leave you? Me? Us? It leaves us wanting to be brave but not reckless. It leaves us wanting to hold on to the sweetness of travel without letting it be tainted by the worst things people do. I still love the idea of a porch at dusk, of sunscreen and lazy afternoons, of surprises that go right. But I also keep a flashlight by the bed now when I stay in houses, and I don't mind that I do. It's a small ritual that closes the arc from naive to careful. If there's a through line in all of this, it's that danger often comes in small gestures that normalize themselves until they don't. That's the chilling part. Once you learn the grammar of those gestures, the awkward extra smile, the camera where it shouldn't be, the way a hand reaches too casually, your whole sense of safety gets rewritten. You learn to pay attention to the punctuation of behavior. It's boring in some ways. It's necessary in others. I'll close with one thing that keeps me honest. Memory is not a single thing. Sometimes the smell of wet wood will put me right back on that porch, and sometimes a flick of white from a camera lens will make me flinch. Those small sensory triggers form a kind of atlas of what went wrong and why I change how I travel. They don't define me, they inform me. If any of these stories resonated, if you've had something similar happen or know someone who has, please share it in the comments. There's power in not being alone with the memory. If you found this meaningful, subscribe for more true travel stories like these. We'll keep telling them, not to frighten you, but to remind us all that travel is wonderful and fragile. It's possible to keep going. We just do it with our eyes open a little wider than before.